Tonight, we are joined by Chris Hedges. Chris is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who was a foreign correspondent for 15 years for the New York Times, where he served as the Middle East Bureau Chief and Balkan Bureau Chief for the paper. He previously worked overseas for the Dallas Morning News, the Christian Science Monitor, and NPR. He is the host of the show, The Chris Hedges Report, which many of you would be familiar with as well. We have the deep privilege of hearing the speech that the National Press Club of Australia refused to let Chris deliver. Yeah, I want to hear that. I was so looking forward to that part. Absolute shame, travesty. Chris was due to speak there on the silencing of Palestinian journalists. The event was confirmed, promoted, and then abruptly cancelled, not without, of course, the side serving of gaslighting, institutional gaslighting, which we're also very accustomed to here in this media and political landscape. And it's all rather ironic, of course, absurd, shocking, but unsurprising to us who have been here as part of the movement. So tonight, Chris delivers that very address, uncensored, unfiltered, and exactly as it was meant to be heard. And we're very privileged to also be having time for a short Q&A afterwards. Please join me in welcoming Chris Hedges.
Australia produces some of the greatest journalists of our era, Julian Assange, John Pilger, but let's be honest, they also produce some of the worst, including the last half hour I just spent being lynched by David Muir on ABC. It was quite a little performance. You can hear it tonight. Listen to it and write ABC. It was appalling. But, before I begin, I just want to let you know that this talk is not sponsored by Raytheon, BAE Systems, and Thales, which sell weapons to Israel to sustain the genocide. It is not sponsored by Amazon Web Services, which provides cloud infrastructure to Israeli defense and intelligence agencies, Deloitte, or MasterCard, which also do business with the apartheid state of Israel. And this is how you know we are not at the National Press Club of Australia. There are two types of war correspondents. The first type does not attend press conferences. They do not beg generals and politicians for interviews. They take risks from combat zones. They send back to their viewers or readers what they see, which is almost always diametrically opposed to official narratives. This first type, in every war, is a tiny minority. Then there is the second type, the inchoate blob of self-identified war correspondents who play at war. Despite what they tell editors and the public, they have no intention of putting themselves in danger. They are pleased with the Israeli ban on foreign reporters into Gaza. They plead with officials for background briefings and press conferences. They collaborate with their government minders who impose restrictions and rules that keep them out of combat. They slavishly disseminate whatever they are fed by officials, much of which is a lie, and pretend it is news. They join little jaunts arranged by the military dog and pony shows where they get to dress up and play soldier and visit outposts where everything is controlled and choreographed. The mortal enemy of these poseurs are the real war reporters, in this case, Palestinian journalists in Gaza. These reporters expose them as toadies and sycophants, discrediting nearly everything they disseminate. For this reason, the poseurs never pass up a chance to question the veracity and motives of those in the field. I watch these snakes do this repeatedly to my colleagues Robert Fisk and John Pilger, and this is of course what I experienced a few moments ago. When war reporter Ben Anderson arrived at the hotel where journalists covering the war in Liberia were encamped, in his words, getting drunk at bars on expenses, having affairs, and exchanging information rather than actually going out and getting information, his image of war reporters took a huge hit. I thought, finally, I'm amongst my heroes, Anderson told me. This is where I've wanted to be for years. And then me and the cameraman I was with, who knew the rebels very well. He took us out for about 3 weeks with the rebels. We came back to Monrovia. The guys in the hotel bar said, "Where have you been? We thought you'd gone home." We said, "We went out to cover the war. Isn't that our job? Isn't that what you're supposed to do?" The romantic view I had of foreign correspondents was suddenly destroyed in Liberia, he went on. I thought, actually, a lot of these guys are full of shit. They're not even willing to leave the hotel, let alone leave the safety of the capital and actually do some reporting. The dividing line, which occurred in every war I covered, defines the reporting on the genocide in Gaza. It is not a divide of professionalism or culture. Palestinian reporters expose Israeli atrocities and implode Israeli lies. The rest of the press does not. Palestinian journalists targeted and assassinated by Israel pay as many great war correspondents do with their lives, although in far greater numbers. Israel has murdered 245 journalists in Gaza by one count, and more than 273 by another. The goal is to shroud the genocide in darkness. No war I covered comes close to these numbers of dead. Since October 7th, Israel has killed more journalists than the U.S. Civil War, World Wars I and II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, including the conflicts in Cambodia and Laos, the wars in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, and the post-9/11 war in Afghanistan combined, according to an April 2025 study by Brown University. Journalists in Palestine leave wills and record videos to be read or played at their death. On a sweltering afternoon a few weeks ago, I was in the office of the head of Palestinian TV in Cairo, talking with Salman al-Bashir, who was the network's correspondent in Gaza. On the evening of November 2nd, 2023, Salman was scheduled for the evening broadcast. It was, he tells me ruefully, the 106th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which in 1917 committed the British government to establishing, quote, a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Palestine TV reporter Mohammed Abu Khattab was concluding his 6-hour shift at 7 p.m. on the grounds of Nasser Hospital in Han Yunis. After reporting on the ongoing bombings and destruction, he handed broadcasting over to Salman. Abu Khattab, whose apartment was next to the hospital, went home. Most of the other journalists, because traveling any distance in Gaza was dangerous, slept in tents on the hospital grounds. There was an explosion near the hospital, Salman says on a video he shows me of his broadcast. We can hear an explosion that is very loud. Television presenter Duha Shami in Ramallah says to Salman, "It sounds close." "Yes," Salman says on air. "There has been an explosion. I see the ambulances. I will let you know when we have any news." A member of the emergency team at the hospital runs towards Salman shouting, "Mohammed Abu Khattab, Mohammed Abu Khattab, your friend, your colleague, has been martyred. They targeted the house of Abu Khattab." Salman stops, he looks into the camera and says, "The target was apparently the house of Mohammed Abu Khattab's family. A lot of people have been killed. Mohammed Abu Khattab was apparently martyred. Salman stands in front of the camera wearing a blue flak jacket with the word press emblazoned on it. He is wearing a blue helmet and holds a microphone. There is no international protection at all and no immunity, he says to the camera tearfully, as the red lights of an ambulance flash behind him. These flak jackets and helmets do not protect us. They are just slogans that we wear. They do not protect journalists at all. Here we are victims losing our lives one after the other at no cost, he says, as he removes the chin strap of his helmet and takes the helmet off. We are waiting for our turn, one after another. He undoes his flak jacket, lets it drop to the ground. We can't take it anymore, he says emotionally on the camera. We're exhausted. Here we become martyrs. It is only a matter of time. No one sees us or the size of the catastrophe. No one sees the crime we are experiencing in Gaza. Psychologically, I couldn't accept it, Salman told me in Cairo. I was with him 20 minutes earlier, now he was dead. They brought his body to the hospital. I refused to look at him. The people who saw him told me half of his face had blown away. In the video, he turns away from the camera and sobs. Duha in Ramallah folds her head into her hands and wipes away tears. We are victims on live television, he says in the broadcast. Mohammed Abu Khatib was here half an hour ago. He left us, along with his wife, his son, his brother, and other members of his family. Salman shows me a video of Mohammed's funeral. He is one of the pallbearers. Mohammed's body is wrapped in a white shroud. His blue flak jacket and a microphone lie on top of his body, along with a small Palestinian flag. There is no God but God, the crowd chants. The martyrs are God's beloved. Salman then shows us a video of the gutted remains of Mohammed's apartment where he and 10 family members were killed. Did you do anything differently after Mohammed was killed, I asked. I was very cautious, Salman answered. How, I asked. With my language, he said. I started speaking very professionally. I talked about the war and the details of a war without using words other journalists were using. I tried not to aggravate the Israelis. I no longer referred to them as Zionists or the new Nazis. I stopped using words like messianic. I stopped calling them the Israeli Occupation Army. I called them the Israeli Army. Salman continued his work until his friend, the Al Jazeera cameraman Samer Abu Daqqa, who had Belgian citizenship, was killed on December 15, 2023, in a drone strike. Samir had sent his family, including 4 children, to Belgium, but he refused to leave Gaza. He and Wael al-Duda, Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief, had been covering the aftermath of an Israeli strike that killed at least 20 people at Haifa school in Han Yunis, which was being used as a shelter for displaced families. Wael was wounded in his hand and stomach, but managed to escape. The Israeli soldiers and hovering drones fired on ambulances and medics attempting to reach Samir. 3 rescue workers were killed. Samir, who was 45, bled to death over 5 hours. I was with Samir on the day before he was martyred, Salman said softly. That was it. I couldn't continue. I had to leave Gaza. In August 2025, when Middle East journalist Mohammed Salama and Ahmed Abu Aziz, Reuters photojournalist Hussam al-Masri, and freelancers Moaz Abu Taha and Mariam Daga, who had worked with several media outlets, including the Associated Press, were killed, along with 15 others at Nasser Hospital in a double tap strike designed to kill first responders following the initial strike. How did Western news agencies respond? Israeli military says strikes on Gaza hospital targeted what it says was a Hamas camera. the Associated Press reported. IDF claims hospital strike was aimed at Hamas camera, announced CNN. Israeli army says 6 terrorists killed in Monday's strike on Gaza hospital, the AFP headline read. Initial inquiry says Hamas camera was target of Israeli strike that killed journalists, Reuters reported. Israel claims troops saw Hamas camera before deadly hospital attack, Sky News explained. For the record, the camera belonged to Reuters. The news agency said Israel was fully aware they were filming from the hospital. Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif, one of the most popular journalists in Gaza, who reported daily on the genocide, received death threats on his phone. In November 2023, the Israeli military ordered Anas to cease reporting and leave northern Gaza. They sent him messages informing him that he was being tracked. His family home was bombed, killing his father. The Israeli military's Arabic spokesman accused him of terrorism and being a Hamas operative overseeing the launching of rockets into Israel. The Committee to Protect Journalists called the sustained attacks on Anas a precursor to assassination. The Tel Aviv-based magazine Plus 972 reported that the Israeli military has a special unit called the Legitimization Cell, which carries out campaigns to portray Palestinian journalists as Hamas operatives in an effort to justify their assassination. In October 2024, Anas was with a group of journalists who were fired upon by Israeli soldiers in Jabalia. Cameraman Fadi El-Wahidi, clearly marked as a journalist in his flak jacket, was shot in the neck and paralyzed. Soon after, the Israeli military accused 6 journalists, including Anas, of being militants. His Instagram account was taken down. On May 2nd, 2025, after Israel blocked food and humanitarian aid, Anas reported on the mounting malnutrition and starvation in Gaza. In July, he posted on social media that he is drowning in hunger and called the starvation a slow death. In one broadcast, he choked back tears as a malnourished woman behind him fainted. A bystander shouted, "Keep going, Anas. You are our voice." On August 10th, 2025, Anas and 3 other journalists were killed by an Israeli drone while in their media tent outside Al-Shifa Hospital. How was the killing of these journalists reported by their colleagues in the Western press? Israel kills Al Jazeera journalist it says was Hamas leader, Reuters titled its story, despite the fact that Anas was part of a Reuters team that had won a 2024 Pulitzer Prize. German newspaper Bild published a front-page story headlined, "Terrorist disguised as a journalist killed in Gaza." The colleagues of these Palestinian journalists in the Western press broadcast from the border fence with Gaza, decked out in flak jackets and helmets, where they have as much chance of being hit by shrapnel or a bullet as being struck by an asteroid. They scurry like lemmings to briefings by Israeli officials. They are not only the enemies of truth, but also the enemies of journalists doing the real work of war reporting. This divide is one I experienced in all the wars I covered. When Iraqi troops attacked the Saudi border town of Hafji during the first Gulf War, Saudi soldiers fled in panic. 2 French photographers and I watched frantic soldiers commandeering fire trucks and racing south. U.S. Marines pushed the Iraqis back. But in Riyadh, the press was told of our gallant Saudi allies defending their homeland. Once fighting ended, the press bus stopped a few miles down the road from Hafji. The pool reporters clambered out, escorted by military minders. They did stand-ups with the distant sound of artillery and smoke as a backdrop, and repeated the lies the Pentagon wanted told. Meanwhile, the two photographers and I were detained as we left Hafchi and beaten by enraged Saudi military police, furious that we had documented the panicked flight of Saudi soldiers. My refusal to abide by press restrictions in the first Gulf War saw the other New York Times reporters in Saudi Arabia write a letter to the foreign editor saying I was ruining the paper's relationship with the military. If not for the intervention of R.W. Johnny Apple, who had covered Vietnam, I would have been sent back to New York. I do not fault anyone for not wanting to go into a war zone. This is a sign of normality. It is rational. It is understandable. Those of us who volunteer to go into combat, my colleague Clyde Haberman at the New York Times once said that I would parachute into any war with or without a parachute, have obvious personality defects. But I fault those who pretend to be war correspondents. They do tremendous damage. They peddle false narratives. They mask reality. They serve as witting or unwitting propagandists. They discredit the voices of the victims and exonerate the killers. They betray those who take great risks to report the truth. When I covered the war in El Salvador before I worked for the New York Times, the paper's correspondent dutifully regurgitated whatever the embassy fed her. This had the effect of making my editors, as well as the editors of other correspondents who did report the war, question our veracity and quote-unquote impartiality. It made it harder for readers to understand what was happening. The false narrative neutered and often overpowered the real one. The slander used to discredit my Palestinian colleagues, claiming they are members of Hamas, is sadly familiar. Many Palestinian reporters I know in Gaza are in fact quite critical of Hamas. But even if they have ties to Hamas, so what? Israel's attempt to justify targeting journalists from the Hamas-run Al-Aqsa media network is also a violation of Article 79 of the Geneva Convention. I worked with reporters and photographers who had a wide variety of beliefs, including Marxist-Leninists in Central America. This did not prevent them from being honest. I was in Bosnia and Kosovo with a Spanish cameraman, Miguel Gil Moreno, who was later killed with my friend Kurt Schork. Miguel was a member of the right-wing Catholic group Opus Dei. He was also a journalist of tremendous courage, great compassion, and moral probity, despite, for what I found, his rather bizarre opinions about Francisco Franco. But he did not lie. In every war I covered, I was attacked as supporting or belonging to whatever group the government, including the US government, was seeking to crush. I was accused of being a tool of the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front in El Salvador, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, the Guatemalan National Revolutionary Unity Party, the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, Hamas, the Muslim-led government in Bosnia, and the Kosovo Liberation Army. John Simpson of the BBC, like many Western reporters, argues, I'm quoting, that the world needs honest, unbiased eyewitness reporting to help people make up their minds about the major issues of our time. This has so far been impossible in Gaza. The assumption that if Western reporters were in Gaza, the coverage would improve is risible. Trust me, it would not. Israel bans the foreign press because there is a bias in Europe and the United States in favor of reporting by Western reporters. Israel is aware that the scale of the genocide is too vast for Western outlets to hide or obscure, despite all the ink and airtime they give to Israeli and U.S. apologists. Israel also cannot continue its systematic campaign of annihilation of journalists in Gaza. if it has to contend with foreign media in its midst. Israeli lies amplified by Western media outlets, including my former employer, the New York Times, are worthy of Pravda. Beheaded babies, babies cooked in ovens, mass rape by Hamas, errant Palestinian rockets that cause explosions at hospitals and massacre civilians, secret command tunnels and command centers in schools and hospitals, journalists who direct Hamas rockets, and protesters of the genocide on college campuses who are anti-Semites and supporters of Hamas. I covered the conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis much of that time in Gaza for 7 years. If there was one indisputable fact, it is that Israel lies like it breathes. The decision by Western reporters to give credibility to these lies, to give them the same weight as documented Israeli atrocities, is a cynical game. The reporters know these lies are lies, but they and the news outlets that employ them prize access, in this case access to Israeli and U.S. officials, above truth. The reporters, as well as their editors and publishers, fear becoming targets of Israel and the powerful Israel lobby. There is no cost for betraying Palestinians. They are powerless. Call those lies out, and you will swiftly find your requests for briefings and interviews with officials rebuffed. You won't be invited by press officers to participate in staged visits to Israeli military units. You and your news organization will be viciously attacked. You will be left out in the cold. Your editors will terminate your assignment and maybe your employment. Your talks will be canceled at press clubs, and this is not good for careers. And so the lies are dutifully repeated, no matter how absurd. It is pathetic watching these reporters and their news outlets, as Robert Fisk writes, fight like tigers to join these pools in which they would be censored, restrained, and deprived of all freedom of movement on the battlefield. The barrage of Israeli lies, amplified and given credibility by the Western press, violates a fundamental tenet of journalism: the duty to transmit the truth to the viewer or reader. It legitimizes mass slaughter. It refuses to hold Israel to account. It betrays Palestinian journalists, those reporting and being killed in Gaza, and it exposes the bankruptcy of Western journalists whose primary attributes are careerism and cowardice. Thank you.